So before we export this, just one thing, the scale on this is absolutely ludicrous at the moment. So this thing's like 4 meters in height, width, and length and all that. So let's just scale this down to be a more reasonable size. So I'm just going to go select the helmet, Shift S, cursor selected, Shift A, and bring in a cube. And I'm just going to isolate this. I'm just going to tab into edit mode, and what we're going to do is I'm just going to show the edge lengths here, which I think I might have shown in previous tutorials, and we're just going to scale this down, and I'm just going to bring it down to around 32 centimeters here. I don't know what that is in feet or inches or anything of the sort, so sorry if that's alienating for my American audience. And then I'm just going to scale down the helmet to roughly match up with this. Doesn't need to be perfect. Just roughly bring it into a more realistic size here. And that's just so that the texturing space isn't all screwed up in Quixel. And then the other thing we need to do is we just need to apply that scale. So just Control A, apply the scale, and now it's at a more proper level. So with that, let's just go ahead, File, Export, and we'll do it as an FBX. And as you can see, I've already done this once, but I'll just delete that. We can just call it smhelmet.fbx or whatever you want. And really importantly, just make sure you limit to selected objects only, otherwise you'll export everything in the scene and you will have a catastrophe of a mesh. So we can just export that, and then we can jump in over to Quixel. So in Quixel here, as you can see, I've already done some mucking around here. But if you just make a new project, just call it Space Marine Helmet or something of the sort, and then inside of that project space, we'll just make a new mix, and I'll just call this Space Marine Helmet. Let's go OK. And so now we've got our new space. So let's just go ahead and in our type, let's get a custom model. And I don't want to bring in the Recon helmet, that's from the previous series. Let's bring in the Space Marine helmet here, so that FBX that we just exported. And now we have our mesh in Quixel, but we can't really see much. So what we want to do is, first and foremost, if you did follow along from my previous Recon helmet modeling tutorial, just make sure you change the scale factor back to 1, because we want to use the scaling that we just did in Blender. We don't want Quixel to adjust that for us. Let's just go edit texture sets, and so we can import our normal map here. So once again, this is still trying to pull from my Recon series. So we'll just bring in the normal bake. I'll bring in the ambient occlusion, and we can also bring in our material ID as such. And so now we've got something a little bit nicer, a little bit more crisp with all the normals. Just ignore the fact that Quixel does render things poorly. Yes, I know that this area was not done in the most optimal way, but, you know, it won't show as poorly in Blender as it is here. And then all we need to do is just start to build out our basic set of materials. So let's make a new folder. And let's just call this one Colors. And let's make a solid. Let's drag this in. So let's call this Primary. This will be our primary color. So we can right click here. We can add an ID mask. And if you just press 8 on your keyboard, that will visualize the ID masks, just in case you're forgetting what's happening. And so we can use the bright red for this one. And we can use Space Marine Blue. I'm just going to set it to a basic blue, and I'll search up a proper value to use for the ultramarine blue in a second. But let's just go with that. And at the moment, it's not really doing much to limit things. So if we just go Control D here to duplicate. And let's just call this secondary. And we can just change our ID mask. So once again, I'm just going to press 8 so I know what I'm looking for. So let's go with the green stripe here. Okay. And once again, I'm just going to put a placeholder color. So I know that middle part to be a red. So I'm just going to smack that as red. And then let's duplicate again, and we'll go secondary 2. And let's just change this from the green. Once again, just pressing 8, and we want that to be the bright blue. And one more placeholder material. Let's just go not too bright of a white, but something like that. And so now we've blocked out the basic colors. One more thing I want to do, and this is just preemptive for what we're going to do at the very end of all the texturing, is I just want you to select both of the secondary colors here, and we'll just put them into a new group or a folder. And we can just call these this folder or group secondary colors. And the reason we want to do this is because, and I'll just show you really quickly, is if we just go ahead and add an ID mask, and so let's limit it to the bright blue and the, the bright green. Because then, if we add a paint mask, what we can do later down the track to add in some damage and detail to the paint masks is we can add in a paint mask here, and then you can see you can start to paint away and erode both of the colours at the same time, which will come in really handy once we've added in all the edge wear and all the scuff marks and all that, and just help sell everything and make it all feel a little bit more cohesive and more organic, and remove these really clean straight lines that we've got all across the model at the moment. And so let's get a very easy win straight away. So I wouldn't normally advocate for using smart materials, just because I feel like it takes out a fair bit of the creativity. But for the tubing at the front, I feel like we don't really need to bother spending all the time going through layer by layer, because these tutorials are long enough as it is. So for the sake of efficiency and getting a decent result and a really quick win, I'm just going to go to the local library, switch it to smart material filtering, and search for rubber. And I really like this heavy rubber tile here. So I'm just going to click and drag that into our layers over here. And as you'll see, that has put it across everything that's not defined by our colors, which is not what we want. So I'm just going to right click on this, add a mask stack. Sorry, an ID mask, my bad. And just press 8. We know that the tubing is yellow, so I'm just going to isolate this to the yellow parts. At the moment, it won't do anything. I think we need to drag it above this. Yes, there we go. The layering in Quixel is very, very strange sometimes. And I think that just gives us a really easy, quick win. I don't want to dedicate a whole lot of time to a rather small part of the model. But just some very quick tweaks that we can make. I just want to make this a little bit darker, so I'm just going to adjust this value from 15 down to 12. Just make it a little bit darker. The cavity dirt, I don't really like how bright it is. I kind of feel like it's a little bit distracting, so I'm just going to go to the albedo here and drag down the value, just make that a little bit less intense. And then with the sharp highlights, I think they're really good by default. It just doesn't have any normal depth to it, so I'm just going to change the height value here to -0.5, and then just drag the raptor underlying down. Not too intense, but just enough so that I can see it, because we didn't actually sculpt any detail onto this, but I think a normal map is more than enough for something like that. So just a quick win, pre-set up material for us. The rest of it we'll all make by hand, but yeah, I just didn't think I needed to explain that step by step for everybody. So let's go ahead and make another group. We can call this one steel. And I've had a little bit of a change of heart with the steel. So I know in the IDs, I separated this magenta and these parts. I'm just going to make them a singular material and color, just to make things a little bit more cohesive. So I'll just add an ID mask. And the great thing is it's pretty modular, so we can change things on the fly. So we can just make the steel inclusive of both the bright pink and the bright cyan colors. So it won't matter the fact that we've actually separated them into two different parts. And so let's just go ahead, add a solid layer, drag that into our steel here. We can just call this steel as well. And just looking online, I'm just going to pull in a dark steel hex value. So I'm going to go 99A3A3. So just say yes to that. And we can just very basically block this out. So obviously steel is metallic, so we want that to be white. And our roughness value, let's drag this down. We don't want it to be completely reflective as a mirror. But something a little bit shinier. So maybe you value around 30. 30 or 25 maybe, if you wanted something a little bit on the glossier side. I think I might go with 30. Obviously it's going to change as we start to layer more materials on. So that's looking good. And then the only thing we're missing is the eyes or the visor or whatever it is you want to call it. Which for this, it's not really too important because we're just really going to drive that with a emission shader within Blender anyway. But if you just want to have the visual style for it here, we can just add a solid layer. We can just call this visor or eyes or whatever. And we can add an ID mask, see what the eyes are. So this bright orange. And very simply for the albedo, so we don't need any other values on this. For the albedo, we can just load in our emission mask and just change the placement from box projection to tiling, and then you'll actually be able to see that pull through. So just more from like a visual style while you're texturing. If you want to be able to see that, you can. And then obviously if you wanted to make it more of that red emissive look, we could multiply a red color on top of these, and we might have to drag it to the bottom of the stack. That's what I mean. Quixel's layering makes no sense. This was at the top and it was inheriting the blue, but at the bottom it does it correctly, so I don't understand. But yeah, so that's just a very simple color block out, and now we can start to iterate and refine and really breathe some more detail into everything. So let's just make some very subtle tweaks to the colors here. So just for the primary, what I'm going to do is I've just searched up an ultramarine blue hex value here, so let's punch that in so that we've got something that looks a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go 0437F2, and let's have a look at that. So it's probably similar to what we just had. I might take some of the saturation out, so I might just customize this a little bit myself. Take some of the saturation out and darken things up a little bit. Not too dark, but let's just go somewhere around here. I think that's looking a little bit better. Just makes the color profile a little bit less over the top and intense. And obviously we're going to strip the color out of this in the end so that you can make this fully customizable. And same for like the red and all that. Let's just go ahead and make this less saturated because I think it's a bit much at the moment. Okay, that just turned to blue for some reason. So let's just go pure red, and then I'm just going to bring down the saturation. Go somewhere like that and bring down the value as well. Make it a little bit darker. Just make it a little bit more gritty and realistic color-wise. And same for the white. We don't really want anything to be pure white, but we don't want it to be grey either. So something like that. Cool. And then for the materials to control these all at the same time, so let's just remove the metalness and the roughness from all of these. Same as this. And we can just go Control D to duplicate the primary. And we can just call this one base. And this one won't contain any albedo data, but it will contain metalness and roughness data. And we'll just have this set to be bright red, green and blue, because those are the things that are controlling our base colors here. And so we can set the metalness. I'm going to go with a value of 50, similar to what we did for the Recon helmet, just because I kind of like that tinted, painted metal look. And for the roughness, let's go with a value of 30, so we've got something glossy to work with, and then we can break it all up. But I think that gives us a nice starting base for everything. And let's go ahead and let's just collapse the colors. Let's just make it another group here. And we'll call this one Variance. And we can start to build out our variance colors. So let's bring in a solid, drag it into our variance. And this one we can call our base roughness, or base variance, sorry. Make sure I spelled it right. And so if you've actually followed along with my Recon helmet modeling texturing series, this is going to be more or less the exact same setup. So if you have already made that, then I'd recommend you save it to a smart material, which I've got a tutorial of how to do, and then you can just bring across most of that work, which is really handy. So sorry, I added a mask stack there, but I don't want to do that yet. So let's change the albedo here to a value of 15. Oops. 15. We'll set this to subtract. We'll set our roughness to a value of 10. And we want to add our roughness on top of our base layer here. And this layer doesn't contain any metalness, so we can just turn that off altogether. Now we can go ahead and add our mask stack. And this one's a very, very simple one, just to add in a little bit of variance. So we'll get a texture map. We'll go a library asset. And we can get rid of that search. Let's go all types. Let's filter down to imperfections. And we're looking for a grunge map. And once again, if you've already done the Recon stuff, you'll know that this is a little bit of a painful process finding roughly the correct things, but it shouldn't be too bad. So I'm just going to go with this and see the sort of results that it gives us. I'm going to change this to roughness. I don't think this is the right one because it's got like these streaks and splotches all over it, so I'm just going to look for a different one. I just kind of want something to just break the map up a little bit. Let's try this one here. Might be okay. Let's give it a try. Let's go to roughness. Won't be the end of the world if it's not the exact same. So let's just clamp the range in to around 0.2 here. Yeah, this is more or less the effect I want. I'll know better once we get the projection in. So we'll go projection. We'll leave this at tiling. We're just going to bring the repetitions up to 2, just so it sort of scales out along everything a little bit more. And I think for the most part that adds a decent little bit of variation. So you don't need to match this one-to-one, as I said in the previous tutorial. This is pretty good. It's probably not exactly what I want, but we can always iterate and change things later on. But anyway, let's keep moving along. So let's get our Variance Dark set up here. So Variance Dark. And so this one will have the albedo set to a value of 35. We'll say yes to that. We want to have this one set to overlay. Overlay here. And now you can see we're actually bringing through the previous layer in, so we're not just like completely losing all that. This one will have metalness. We'll just leave it at a value of black because we kind of want to remove any of the underlying metalness with this layer. We'll set our roughness here to a value of 28. And we'll set that one to add. Just so that we're adding more white values to make some more dull roughness spots on our variance. Cool, so let's right click, we can add a mask stack, and let's go ahead and for our first one here, we'll bring in a texture map. We'll go library asset, and we're just going to try to find a scratched metal. And the annoying thing about scratched metal maps is that they're all named the same way. There's no naming conventions to really separate them. So let's search for scratch. And also the filtering system in Quixel is terrible. So let's just try to find, I think this one, it's got like fairly, so let's add a mask modifier and we can get a gradient rimmer. We'll leave the repeat at 1 and we'll just clamp the right handle here down to around 0.6 so we can just add in a little bit more contrast to everything. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to be the right one because it just looks a little bit weird. But anyway, we can adjust it at the end. We'll build out the mask and we'll see how it all looks. And let's go ahead. We'll bring in a noise texture. And we want to set our noise texture here to be overlay so that we're not just overriding the previous one. And then we're going to set the seed to 71. And once again, yes, I am reading off of predefined values here. We'll change the amplitude to 0.6. Our frequency to 11. Let's crank the octaves up to 8. Our luminarity to 2. It's already at 2, didn't need to change it. And the persistence to 0.75. So I don't think this is really giving me the effects that I'm looking for. But mind you, I didn't do a box projection here. I completely missed that. So let's add in projection. I'm just going to alt-click to isolate this projection just to this one here. Box projection. And we'll give it a tilt of 90, just as it is here. We'll bring the radius all the way up to 1 to sort of evenly blend things a little bit more, which I think is working because it's sort of taking out those really high contrast areas. So this might be correct. I'm going to just take the height influence. Yeah, I'll take the height influence out. It always seems to give some strange results that I just don't really like. And I'm going to bring the scale down to 0.6. Yeah, okay, I definitely think that looks a lot better. Kind of throws me at the start when I first see those things, but I think that's working a lot better for us, which is nice. And let me just flick through these. So yeah, it's kind of adding some nice like stained areas. So if we just toggle between, you can see that that's just adding a little bit more variance to everything. So we're getting a lot nicer surface imperfections and details and everything. And so let's go ahead, we'll make another solid layer. We can call this one roughness variance. Roughness variance. And very similar to the rest of them, let's go ahead. So this one is just affecting our roughness. And not our metalness or albedo. Sorry, roughness. So let's change this to a value of 94. It's just a little bit brighter than the base value. We'll make the opacity of this one 0.75. And we'll have it add onto the rest of our layers. Let's go ahead, let's add in a mask stack. Once again, we'll just bring in a grunge map here. So we'll go texture map. Library asset, and can we search for grunge to filter down? Yeah, we can, good. So I'm looking for something that's a little bit streaky, and I do know it's just called grunge. which once again makes it really annoying because of the way that the naming conventions work in Quixel. This one might be it, so I'm gonna try this one, see what we get, because that's sort of got these more streaky areas to it. I know it's got those splotches and all that, so this is the one that I used the first time. And let's just crank the gloss up to close to 0.6. So 0.587 looks like it might work. And then, very similar, we're just going to go ahead and get a projection modifier, and we'll change it to box projection. Let's go with an angle of -30. So I'm just holding down shift here, and that will give me 15-degree increments. So just try -30, which I think is just nice because we're sort of getting more streaked values across. So if we just change this back to 0, it's sort of all very uniformly applying across. So I think just giving it a bit of a rotation, you could go further or less, go 15. I just think, especially along the front, I kind of like this on an angle around the faceplate. I think it's quite nice. We'll leave the tilt value at 90, and we'll just bring our radius up to 1. We'll take our height influence off, because just sort of, I don't know why, it sort of introduces some strange artifacts. I don't know what the height influence is supposed to be doing, but it doesn't seem to do its job for me properly, so it's probably a user error, in all honesty. And we can just bring the scale down. And I'm not loving the way that's sort of propagating along the front of the faceplate now, so I might actually go ahead and change the rotation a bit now that we've got that scaled differently. If we change the tilt maybe. Okay, I think that might sort of help. Maybe I don't hold down shift, maybe I just... Kind of liking the bit of grunge that's giving along the side of the faceplate there. It's a bit unique. So I'm just going to go with that. So I've sort of just mucked around with the values a little bit more because I am directly adapting this from the recon textures, just because I really like this setup personally for textures, especially on armor. I think it looked quite nice. So I'm just going to go with that. And we can see that we're already starting to really pack some detail into this, which is quite nice. And so we've just got one more variance that we need to build in here, and that's just a general roughness. So we'll add in another solid layer, call this one roughness. This one will have albedo, metalness, and roughness. So we'll leave the metalness at black, we'll change the roughness to black as well. And we'll just leave all the blending types at normal. But for the albedo, we'll change this to be 15, so this will be a darker level of albedo onto our color map here. And so let's just go ahead and add in a mask stack, and let's bring in some scratched metal. So we'll get texture map, library asset, just get rid of the last search. So some scratched metal. What do we want? Can I just search for scratch? Scratched rubber, scratched metal. Once again, I think we want something that's fairly light in contrast. Surface. Let's just go with this one again. I know we're reusing it, but we are going to project it a little bit differently and use it differently and vary it up and everything. So we'll leave it at gloss, and we'll just change the range, bring this up to 0.4. So just somewhere around there. I think this might be the correct one to use because, yeah, we kind of want to get those scratches with just like a little bit of that grunge. And let's go ahead. We'll bring in another texture map. We'll set this to library asset once again. And this one we want a dirty metal, so I'm going to search for dirty. There we go, there's only one of these, so that makes it nice and easy. And we just want to change the blending type here to add, just so that it's integrating with our previous map. And we'll just change our range here, we'll just bring this down to 0.6. Oops. So we're just sort of like roughening everything up a little bit. So if we look at the textures here, it kind of seems like everything's a little bit glossier than what I'd expect. That's just because I haven't changed this from gloss to mask. Yeah, that's why. There we go, that's better. I was going to say, that's way too glossy. That doesn't make any sense. Why would we make a layer like that? But yeah, now you can see you're just getting like these nice, really reflective black scratches across everything. So they might actually be a little bit too reflective. I don't know if it integrated a little bit differently on the Recon helmet, but I think they're a bit too reflective. in all honesty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the roughness value here. So I'm just going to go to our roughness. And sorry, I haven't explained it, but I'm just pressing the num keys or the whatever the ones are across the top. I think, does your numpad work? No. So the num keys across the top of your keyboard, I'm just switching between. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 doesn't seem to do anything. And you can also change that between just clicking here as well. Sorry, I forgot to explain that. So I think 4 is roughness, yeah. And yeah, I'm just going to bring this value up a little bit so it's not like completely 100% reflective. I might change it just a little bit, make it a little bit more reflective than what it is, just so it's got some more variation. 14 maybe? Yeah, I think that works. It makes it stand out quite nicely. So yeah, that's our base sort of like variation masks built out, and we'll continue to build some wear and tear on top of this to really bring it more to life, because it does still look a little bit flat at the moment. So let's make another group, a folder. We call this one our edgeware, or just our wear would probably be a better term, because our first solid layer here, this one will be our edgeware. So edgeware. And I think this is the best part of the texturing process, is doing all the edgeware, because it really starts to make it look a lot more worn and lived in. So let's change the height to -0.5. We'll set the Raptor underline to 0.99. We can change these values later on. I think this is just a good starting point. For the albedo, I'm going to give you a specific hex value here. You don't have to use it, but I just think it looks quite nice. So we're going to go 777 C7F. Sorry, I was trying to think of the next number. I wasn't expecting a letter. So yeah, like kind of like a steel sort of like color, a little bit more on the bluey tinge of things. And then we want to go for our metalness, because obviously this is like where the paint has been completely eroded away. So then we're seeing just the underlying material that the helmet is built on. I'm just really confused as to what's going on with the... is that because of the ambient occlusion bake? Yeah, it is, just on the eyes. Okay, that's why it's displaying really weirdly. It's all good. Sorry, I could just notice that, and it was really throwing me as to what was happening. And we'll change our roughness here to be a value of 44. So that's the sort of metal material that we're going to create for this. All right, so let's go ahead and bring in a mask stack, and we'll start out with a curvature map so that we can pick up on all of the edges of our model here. So we just want to change this to be, no, sorry, not the mix. We want to change it to edges only, because this is an edgeware mask, so that makes sense, right? And then we can just adjust the tightness here, so we can just clamp everything uniformly. So we'll just bring this up to around 0.4 here. So something like that. And then the levels we can just use to add just a little bit more to the clamping. So I'm just going to bring the white down to like a value of 0.2, maybe closer to 0.3 a little bit. So around there. So we can just brighten everything up a bit. It's a bit uniform and a bit much at the moment, but we want to start with a good base, and then we can modify everything as we go. So let's go ahead, let's bring in a noise. We'll set this to Warley 1. I don't really know how to pronounce it. Let's change this to multiply for the blend mode. So this will start to erode away at the underlying edgeware. And we'll change the opacity to 0.2. Cool, so let's go with a seed of -55. Once again, this is just what I'm reading off of, so you're more than welcome to adjust these to your preference. I'm going to go with an amplitude of 9. A frequency of, we can just leave that at 5, I think it should be fine. The octaves will bring up to 7. The lacunarity will bring up to 3. And the persistence will go to 0.7. So you can see we're just adding in a little bit of variation there to just break the mask up. At the moment, it looks absolutely horrific because it is just being uniformly applied, but you can see how it's starting to breathe a little bit of life into the model just by adding in a little bit more color variance. So with that, let's go ahead and continue building this out. So we'll bring in a brightness and contrast, which is top of the stack there. Now we'll just hold down Alt and click, so this is only affecting the noise and not our curvature. And so let's just go ahead and change our brightness to be -0.1. I'll just do it in the mask viewer, so just press 9. And we'll adjust the contrast to be 7.2. And so you can see that just helps erode everything away at a much greater degree. So you can see if we just disable the brightness uniformly being applied across every part of the edge, this just helps break it up and sort of bring everything out a little bit more. With the edge wear, something we don't want, notice how we're getting edge wear right in the crevice here. It doesn't make any sense that something would have damaged the helmet, when it would have been protected by more of the outside here and get right into that edge. So what we can do is we can use our ambient occlusion map, and this is a really, really handy use of it. So we'll just pull on a texture map here. We'll set it to a custom map, as it already is, sorry. Let's go ahead, add in an image, and we'll just bring in our ambient occlusion. And so we want to change this from normal to multiply. And I'm just going to go back to the mask viewer. And let's go ahead and we'll adjust the range here. So we're just going to bring this range up really, really high, just until we can start to see it erode away some of the edge wear in the corners there. So I'm just going to bring it up 0.952, so that's like a really high value. And if I just alt and click on the viewer there, you can see just how intense it is. And so all the black areas, because it's set to multiply, it's pretty much telling Quixel, like, hey, only multiply and retain the white values, and all the black values will disappear. And so that really helps just sort of get rid of some of those details there. Still not perfect, but I think it looks just a little bit better than, especially down here, I think would be a better example. Yeah, it makes literally no sense for, there to be edge wear in there, because there's no way anything could realistically or feasibly scrape along these edges. So it just helps sort of clean that up a little bit for us. We can break this up a little bit more, make this look a little bit nicer. So let's go ahead. We'll bring in another noise. We'll just leave this one at simplex. We'll also set it to multiply though, because we don't want it to just override everything else. Let's set our seed to 10. Our amplitude, bring that up to 6. Our frequency, we can set to 9.5 and 9.5. Now for the octave, let's go 6. And the lacunarity, let's go 2.7. And our persistence, let's go 0.6, just a little bit higher. So if we just toggle that on and off, you can see that we're just introducing a little bit more breakup into everything, a little bit more variation, just to make it a little bit less uniform. And it also doesn't make everything so harsh, because notice how everything's like a big splotch before that noise, and then when we bring this noise in, it's sort of, we retain some of the areas that are, really harsh, bits of paint that have been stripped away, and some other areas are just a little bit more whittled down, just to add a little bit more realistic, quote-unquote variation. So that's our base edge wear layer done. And obviously, you're free to modify all of these values in here to make it suit whatever style you're going for, but I quite like this, and that's why I'm teaching it, obviously. So let's go ahead, we'll bring in another solid layer, and this will be our micro scratches. So as you can imagine, this is just a set of very small scratches to just break up the micro level detail and everything. So once again, let's give it a height value of -1, and the raptor underlying, put this to 0.97. Actually, thinking of this, I just want to see, how's the normal looking here? I can't remember which one's my normal. So I think it's having an impact, but I just don't know if it's very significant. So I might just change the raptor underlying to like 0.95 maybe. That's too intense, maybe 0.97. I think 0.99 is probably a little bit too thin. 0.96. Yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. Gives us a little bit more bump. And for things like this, if you don't like these, we can always do some manual painting at the end. We will be doing a fair bit of manual painting for this helmet, as I alluded to with the paint strips. So don't be too concerned with all this. And we'll also probably end up removing some of the edge wear and stuff from the metallic parts, or maybe just doing some manual painting on them, because I'm not loving the way that that looks on them. But we are building out a separate material for those anyway, so we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. Anyway, sorry, back to the micro scratches. So we've adjusted our height. Yep, that's why I got distracted. Let's set our albedo to just a value of 30 here. I mean, we could always use the same edgeware value here, so we can always just copy this hex value that we used and bring that across to the microstructures if you wanted to. Kind of makes sense, I suppose. Like, if it's scraping the paint away, it should be the same color, right? And we'll just change the blend type to add. And then our roughness, we'll set this to complete black for the time being, so it's just completely reflective. I think this works just because of how small the scratches are, so it's not too reflective, and then the smaller pixel count, it's not exact black anyway, so it sort of bleeds out just a little bit. And we'll set the metalness to white. And without any masking, we have a really weird looking Space Marine helmet now. So let's fix this up. So let's right click, add in a mask stack. And let's pull in a texture map as a library asset. And we're looking for scratched metal. And this one's a specific type. It's kind of like these ones here, where it's just very high levels of contrast between two material values. So I have it written down as just scratched metal, scratch painted metal. And what am I using? I'm using it as a roughness mask. Let's try, I feel like it's probably not that one. Let's try this one here, because it doesn't look like, I'm picking this one because the preview didn't have any like massive scratch splotches. I'm looking for like very fine sort of scratch marks here. So let's just start to build the mask out, and then we can always come back and adjust which one we've picked here later on. So I'm going to set this to roughness, and I'm going to change the range, bring this up to around 0.45. And we'll bring this range down to like 0.59 or more like 0.6, just so we're isolating most of the scratches. So this map does look to work, but I don't kind of like some of the splotch marks on here. But as I said, let's just build out the mask stack first, and then we can adjust this later. So let's bring in a projection. We'll set this to box projection. We'll leave our tilt at 90, bring the radius up to 1, get rid of the height influence just to get rid of some of those strange artifacts. Goodness. Let's change our scaling to 0.8, or adjust it to whatever you want. Pretty much the idea is I just want to lower it just to make this more frequent. And the more I'm looking at this, this is definitely not going to be the correct scratch map. That's all right. We can just build this out and then adjust it. Cool, so let's kind of break this up a little bit, even though this isn't the correct scratch map. And actually, it's alright, I'm not going to bother trying to adjust it because we'll change the map afterwards. So let's bring in a noise texture. We'll set it to simplex and the blend type to multiply, so this is just going to break things up. So use a seed of -4, an amplitude of 2.7. We'll get a frequency of 11. And we'll chuck in 5 octaves. A lacunarity of 2.7, and a persistence of 0.4. So yeah, at the moment this doesn't look right, but we will fix everything up in just a second, and then we'll just round this out by bringing in a texture map and using our ambient occlusion once again, because we don't really want all these scratches propagating into the crevices. So we'll just set this to multiply, and we can just drag up the range, and even though this isn't the correct scratch map, it'll give us an indication of how this is sort of culling everything out. So I'm just going to go there. I'm not going to go as extreme as the edgeware and let this have a little bit more lenience. So this is not what I want because this doesn't look right in any capacity. So let's just go see. Just want to collapse some of these. Let's see if we can find a better scratched metal map. Okay, so I ended up finding what I wanted. And I couldn't find what I was looking for, mainly because the filtering in Quixel, as I've established, is terrible. So I just changed it to imperfections and metal and just got rid of my search result. And it was this second one here, this scratched metal. I just want to test this third one along because it looks like it might also work. In all honesty, I think this one's better. So yeah, if you adjust the imperfections and metal, and then they kind of look like this, hopefully it sort of filters it the same way. I'm going to go with this third one here, and this is the kind of result that it's giving me once we set it to roughness. And so some of the scaling values, I don't think they really carry across quite as well for the Space Marine helmet, so I'm just going to adjust the projection and scaling, so I'm just going to bring this down to like 0.2 maybe. That's probably a little bit too fine, so maybe 0.4. So we had 0.8, so I'll halve it. I think that looks quite nice. And I might actually bring up the intensity of the range of the ambient occlusion, just once again to sort of limit those from hitting in the corners there. So I think that's quite nice. It adds some nice scratch maps all over the place. But I feel like it's a little bit intense with the way it's pulling through. So what I might do, I don't think I did this on the Recon one, but I'm just going to bring down the opacity a little bit, just to make this a little bit less intense. So let's go 0.5, let's just see if half the value works. I think that's nice. And I feel like we can get away with more battle damage on Space Marine or like Warhammer oriented model. Just I think it fits the tone and vibe of Warhammer assets a little bit better. So I like 0.5. I just want to see 0.75. Look at it from a distance. You know, I'm going to go for a middle ground. I'm just going to go for 0.6 just to reduce it a little bit more, but still have that implemented. And I just want to check what it's looking like on the normal map here. Yeah, okay, I think that's nice. It's probably a little bit too much in all honesty, but I kind of like it. I think it's adding some nice surface level imperfections, so you can just see how that's sort of bringing things to life a little bit more. And we get some nice reflective highlights crop up here and there. Cool. So let's go on to make some paint chips, which just sort of helps with the edge wear, because at the moment that's exclusively on all of the edges of the model, right? But we sort of want some paint chipping everywhere else in the model too. So let's go paint chips. And we'll do a very similar setup, so we'll set this to a height of -1. The Raptor underlying will go 0.97. I'm going to go 0.97 for everything, I think, because we kind of want the like the normal depth to be more or less consistent, because we have if we have areas of overlap with different height values, it looks a little bit weird. And once again, I'm just going to copy the hex value because I'm just going to keep this consistent. I don't think I did in the Recon series, and I don't know why I did that. And once again, we'll set our metalness to white. And we'll set our roughness to 40, which I think is the same roughness value as our edge wear, because we do want these to be consistent. Oops. We had 44. Let's just go 44 here. I don't really see the need for there to be a difference between these. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in my mind. Alright, cool. So let's go ahead and start to build out the stack. So we'll bring in a texture map. We're going to use a library asset. And we want to use, scratched metal here. So I'm just going to search with imperfections and metal. I'm just going to search for scratch. And I think it is this one this time, because I know we're looking for a mask that is rather intense with its contrast, because then we sort of want to subtract itself from itself with a very, very slight amount of an offset, which you'll see what I mean in a moment. So let's change this from gloss to roughness. No, sorry, mask, my bad. Because we just want black and white values. We don't really want anything with grey or in-between values. And we'll invert that mask so that all the paint chips are in complete white. And then, because we don't really want these grey areas here, what we'll do is we can just bring up the range to around 0.5 to just sort of cull those out. And now we're just left with these big splotches, which at the moment would look absolutely horrible. So let's adjust this. So with the texture map selected here, we're just going to go Control-D to duplicate it. You can rename it if you want. I'm not really too worried about naming conventions here. And for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to change it from mask to roughness. We're not going to have it inverted anymore. And we're going to change the blending type from normal to minimum. And it won't do anything just yet, but you'll notice the difference it'll make once we start to adjust the projection. So let's get, projection. And we'll alt-click just so that the projection mapping is only affecting the duplicate instance of this scratched metal here. And what we'll do is we'll change our X and Y tiling to 2. So now you can see we're subtracting the map from itself, right? So now we're just sort of getting these slight paint chips cropping up on the model. And you don't have to use 2 and 2. You're more than welcome to, go 2 and 3 or adjust these values to whatever you want. But let's build out the rest of the mask first, because then I think it's going to be easier to understand how we want to adjust those values there. So let's bring in a Warley 1. I think I've pronounced that in 2 different ways now. We'll go with a seed of 78, an amplitude of 10. So we want everything here to be like very extreme values, and I'll just show you what I mean by that. So just with the current paint chips we have, notice how we got these really bright white paint chips? They're great because it's completely eroded the paint layer away, but then we've got these more grey area values here, right? And you get this weird blend of like a paint chip, but then also it's blending with the paint color. And the idea of the paint chips is that the paint has been chipped, it's gone, right? So we don't want any of these in between values. We just want it to be either completely black or completely white and nothing in between. So that's why we're really cranking up the amplitude here, and we want to get rid of all these gray areas as well, which we will adjust just in a second here. And so let's change our frequency to 2. We'll just leave it at 1 octave because we want this to be a rather large sort of influence. The lacunarity to 1.5 and our persistence to a value of 1. And then to get rid of some of those, the grey areas, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What we can do is we can bring in a gradient remap, which gives a really strange and psychedelic sort of look to everything. But what we'll do is we're just in this range here, we'll just bring this down from 1 to 0.1. Oh, and sorry, I was really confused for a second. Why is this so strange? It's because we haven't set this to multiply. My bad. So set this to multiply. There we go. Now it makes way more sense. Sorry about that. So yeah, sorry. If I just turn the gradient remap off. So this was our... Actually, sorry, if I turn the noise off. So the noise is just going to ensure that it sort of cuts out some areas of the paint chips. And then any areas that are retained are more or less completely white, but you can see it's not doing a perfect job of that. And then our gradient remap, all it's doing is going like clamp that range down so that, it's not perfectly white, but it mostly clamps out all of the grey and in between values. So I'll just show you here with the actual material setup. So if we just disable both of these, I think this one here is a really good focus point. So we put our noise on top, that really makes it a little bit more intense. And then I don't know if there's any other good examples. This one's probably a good one here. So we're getting some more grey values towards the edge, which probably isn't too noticeable, but once we chuck this on, you notice it really chips that away and takes it out. So, if you kind of like the less harsh points, actually, I think this one's a better one. See how you're getting that bleed into the red there? Just make sure that you remove that. But if you like it the other way, ultimately this is up for interpretation and artistic styling. I just personally like the paint chips to completely chip out that area of paint. And so then, because this is obviously a fully procedural setup, you might get some paint chipping that you don't like or some really large sections. For the most part, I think this is pretty alright. I think it's done a decent job. But you do have full control over how much paint chipping you're getting. So obviously you could modify all of the noise patterns here. But your biggest one is adjusting like the repetitions and the offset with your X and Y here. So you can muck around with these and, try to get some of these scratches and more unique looking details across the model. So you do have a nice level of control, because if you're getting, like, say you don't like a big piece at the back here, obviously we can manually paint it out later. But yeah, it just gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing. Personally, I think we're going to leave it like this because I kind of like this scratch that it's just created along the front there. So that's working quite nicely. It's just adding like some highlights to the edges. So these parts have been completely eroded away, right? Like the paint's gone. But if it's been scraped against something, you'd sort of assume that not everything has been completely eroded paint-wise. It might sort of just have lightened the surface up a little bit or been a less intense sort of scratch. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add some edge highlighting in. So just add in a new solid. So we'll go edge light. And for this one, what we'll do, so we'll go height of -0.25, so a little bit less intense. and a wrap to underlying of, let's go 0.99, because I don't want this one to shine through too prominently, because otherwise it kind of makes the whole thing look like alfoil. It's really weird. And let's change our albedo value here to be 60. We want this to add down into everything else because we want it to brighten everything else up. And let's bring the opacity down to 0.1 because this is a pretty intense effect, and we only want it to just barely pull through. Now, I'm also going to use a metalness value here of 50. And my rationale behind this is, like, as I said, it's just a very light scrape along the edges, so you're kind of retaining some of the paint there, but you're just kind of also seeing just a little bit of the underlying material, so that's my rationale for that. And then we'll just adjust our roughness here to be a value of 66. Just so it's a little bit glossy, but a little bit rough at the same time, just not quite 50-50, but just a nice kind of middle ground. Alright, so let's bring in our mask stack, and we want to bring in a texture map, and we want to bring in a library asset. So we're looking for a grunged surface here, so I'm just going to get rid of the metal filter. And I'm just going to search for grunge, and I'm looking for a slightly grunge surface. I think it's that one there, and if that is the only one, cool, that makes it nice and easy. So there's only one called slightly grunge surface, which is nice. So we'll leave that at gloss, and we'll just crank the range up here to around 0.26, and bring this in about 0.42, just so we're getting more of the streaked sort of areas. And then we'll bring in a projection. We'll just alt-click. It's not really going to make much of an effect, but just good practice. I don't think I've done that for every single one, mind you, even though I say good practice. Let's change the radius. So I don't want to completely... So normally we just go with a value of 1 to sort of blur the lines between everything. Or 0. But either way, I kind of want to retain just a little bit of the difference it provides on each angle, because this is mostly on the edges of everything. So I'm just going to go with a radius closer to 0.4. So somewhere around here. Going to get rid of the height influence. Just notice how it brings in all those streaks. Really don't like them. Once again, don't know what it's doing. Probably a used rarer. And let's bring the scale down to like 0.1. Yeah, because we just want to scatter this across the helmet a lot. This might tile just a little bit too much, but we can adjust it later down the track. Cool, so let's go ahead and bring in the curvature. So we'll leave it default curvature, underlying mix. We'll leave the tightness at 0 here. And we'll bring our levels up to around 0.5, closer to 0.6, sorry. And then with our right handle, we'll just bring this to 0.73, or close to 0.74. Cool, and we'll just go ahead and set this to multiply, just so we're grabbing the underlying mix from previously. Now, this is all just a little bit too harsh. I kind of want to spread this out a little bit more. I don't want it to be as tight as the actual edgeware itself. So let's bring in a Gaussian blur, and we'll just alt and click to have this only affect our curvature mask. And we'll bring this down to like 0.04, so it's like, it's still kind of tightly packed in around the edges, but just letting that sort of expand just a little bit further than usual. And then what we want to do, so we want to actually go ahead and duplicate this curvature, so Control D, and we want to drag this up and above our blur node here, or layer. I don't think these are nodes. And we'll change the blend mode to add, which makes everything very, very intense. So we just want to bring the opacity down really, really fine. So I'm going to go 0.05, and I'll just toggle between here. What it's doing is it's just brightening up the middle sections of everything where the edgeware is most prominent. It does only just a very, very little bit, but I think it just sort of helps. And I think it shines through a little bit better when we actually view it on the material here. But we've still got to build out a little bit more. So let's just keep going with this. And I might need to adjust some of these values since this is a different model, but there are also more layers that we need to add in here. So let's go ahead, we'll bring in another gradient remap here, and so we're going to bring this range down to 0.27 here, or thereabouts. And so now you can see we've made that effect a lot more intense, which you can much better see in the shading tab here. So you can see we're sort of brightening up the edges. But we kind of want to break this up a little bit because it's a little bit consistent across everything at the moment, which is not what we want. So let's go ahead and, oops, with the blending type, we'll add in a simplex noise texture. And I'm going to go with a seed of -12. And sorry, we'll set this to multiply so we can actually see the effects that it's having. We'll have an amplitude of 2, so just double that there. We'll have a frequency of 9.2. Oops, 9.2. Octaves, we'll crank that all the way up to 10, just so we're getting the highest amount possible. The lacunarity will go 1.7, and our persistence can be 0.76. And so you can see we're just introducing nice levels of breakup there. And then, similar to all the other things that we've done regarding edge wear, we just kind of want to clamp it in so it's not affecting any of the crevices. So we'll bring in a texture map, custom map, ambient occlusion, set it to multiply, obviously. And then we can just, as with everything else, clamp in these ranges here just so we're not getting any of the edge wear brightness pouring into the crevices. And I don't think this is having as strong as an effect as previously, so we might have to adjust some of these values here, but let's just toggle it on and off. So you can definitely see the effect that it's having and how it's sort of brightening things up. It's very, very subtle at the moment. So I might even adjust the opacity here. I might bring it up to like 0.2 maybe, just have it shine through a little bit more, which I think looks nice. And then possibly even for this curvature, as I said, I might bring this up to like 0.1. I don't really think that's made much of a difference. What if we bring the opacity to 1? I think it's definitely too strong. So let's try 0.5. No, 0.2. I'm just cognizant, because around the bottom here it seems to be very prominent. So I might actually go back to 0.05. And let me just have a look. So the opacity was at 0.1. Maybe 0.15, just to bring it through a little bit more. I'll just zoom out a bit because you'll mostly be looking at this from a distance. Yeah, okay, I'm going to leave it there. I think that adds a nice little bit of detail. And then we've just got one more thing that I want to do, and then we'll round out this portion of the tutorial because we've got plenty more to do in the next tutorial. So our final part of the wear, at least, is just adding some surface level bump, because at the moment everything is, well, apart from the micro scratches, the surface is completely smooth. There's no like sort of like granular level detail, which kind of reduces the realism a little bit. But once we add it in, you'll notice it does make a pretty drastic effect. So let's add in another solid layer here. We can just call this one our surface bump, like so. Actually, thinking of surface bump, sorry, I keep on forgetting to check, but I just want to look at how the edge light is pulling through here. Yeah, okay, so that's very much not noticeable. I'm just going to drag the slider a bit. And I'm just going to set up the surface bump for a second, because I think that might actually help with making this more apparent. So I don't want to do it that much, because now it's getting that alfoil sort of look. Let's go 0.9, see what that looks like. And just cognizant at the bottom here. Yeah, I think 0.9 is probably a little bit too intense, so I might go 0.95, possibly. 0.93. I'll go 0.93. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, as you can see, you don't need to follow the values I provide exactly, because much like modeling and everything else in 3D, this is very much an iterative process, and it's not just clear cut as use this value and that value. It's really just personal preference and the way you want to style your assets at the end of the day. Anyway, let's go ahead and we'll change this to an opacity of 0.25, which is probably a bit preemptive, but once again, we can adjust these later on. I'm just going based off of my documentation here. We'll give a height of -1 and a raptor underlying of 0.95. And this is going to be a more uniform thing that we apply to everything. And let's go with a albedo value of 42. So this will like kind of uniformly darken all of our materials as well a little bit. We'll give a metalness value of 50, which actually, now that I'm thinking of it, no, it's all right, it does work, it's all good, because we do mask some areas out. It's fairly uniform, but yeah, there is a bit of masking, so Just my internal monologue. All right, let's go ahead, add in a mask stack, and we want to bring in some grunge maps here. Look at the library asset. So they are called grunge. Kind of feel like we want ones that are fairly noisy. Not like that. I don't like the little dot splotch sort of thing that's going on there. Let's see, what's this look like? All right, I'm going to start with this one. I don't like that there's greater levels of contrast here, but we'll see if it works. So let's bring this range up to around 0.7. This is kind of what I'm going for, but not quite. I kind of want it to resolve into more patches, if anything. Not quite like that. A little bit more grainy. Let's try this one. It's got pretty high contrast. That kind of works. All right, let's start with this and see where we end up. Because we are going to duplicate this one here, and we'll set this to multiply so that we're actually getting the influence of it. But we'll just drop our value of 1 on the right handle here down to 0.9. So I think the intent of that is to just brighten these up. Okay. So yeah, I don't know if this is right, but we can come back and adjust it in a bit. Let's just build this out more. So let's get a projection. Oops, I want this to be at the top of the stack. We'll set this to box projection with a radius value of 1. Bring the height down to 0. And let's bring the scale down to 0.15. Yeah, I definitely think we need a different grunge map here because it's not quite giving me the results I want. Okay, this is looking a little bit better. So, sorry, I just found... Which one was it? Was it this one? Yeah, God. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I just used this one here, so it's right at the top. I was looking in all the wrong places. This seems to be a little bit closer to what I wanted. So I'm just going to duplicate this, do the adjustment, so bring this down to 0.9. Set this to multiply, cool, and then yeah, we definitely bring the scale down to 0.15 now. Yeah, okay, that's much more in line with what I wanted. Cool. And so what you can see that this is doing, so sorry, I know that took a little bit. Hopefully I can edit that down to make it a little bit nicer to watch. But what this is doing is it's just adding this fine layer of bump across everything here. So if we just turn this off, notice how everything is completely smooth, you know, it doesn't really catch light anywhere. Whereas this sort of adds this nice level of bump to everything and just makes it look a little bit more realistic so that the surface isn't completely clean and flat. And in a way, it kind of does add to the roughness a bit because it means that there's more like surface level light bouncing going on. And so, you know, if you wanted to bring up the intensity of the opacity or anything to make it more intense, probably not at a level of 1, because once again, that's giving it that alfoil sort of look. But, you know, what did I have it at? An opacity of 0.25, so you could double it, go 0.5 if you wanted to make it a bit more intense. I think that's personally too much. So I'm going to leave it at 0.25. You know, you could get more granular with the height detail and the raptor underlying and whatever. But yeah, so let's just have a quick check in here. So this is where we started at the tutorial. For some reason it's not actually getting rid of all the surface bump layers. There we go. So this is where we started, right? And then we added in our variance to just sort of dirty everything up a bit. And now that we've added in all of our surface bump, it's looking much more alive. Actually, sorry, I did just realize how long this tutorial's been running for. So we are going to leave it there for this one. Sorry, I know it's not looking absolutely perfect yet, but just give you guys a breather. I probably need a break as well. And we'll come back, and this might end up being 2 or 3 parts for the texturing, because we have to do some manual painting to erode the red and white strips here, and we also need to do some masking for the dents and scratches and all that, which I think we might have to extract from the geometry back in Blender, but I'll have to do a bit of testing, and then I'll figure that out for you all in the next part. But yeah, look, this is looking good. Please make sure to save your file. You'll know it's saved when the asterisk isn't there, because you don't want to lose all this. It'd be really painful. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next texturing part.